it seems to me that we've already kind of started these discussions, and it seems to me that what we've done in the last 5 minutes is to kind of like recall some of the themes that have been discussed in all of the panels today. And I think that this is how we should go forward. And we announced it as a roundtable between how many are we? Six, I think, 7, something like that, 7. So basically all the chairs of the panels, and let me say their names. So Naomi House chaired the first panel on environments, Anne Robinson chaired the second one on bodies and gender, Emma Dick the panel on sustainability, Luke White the 4th panel on cultures and identities, Lilly Hausman's the 5th one, which we've just finished, on nature and culture, and Rujana Rebernjak on exhibition cultures. And I was thinking that, yes, let's have a general discussion based on what we've heard today. And maybe, I mean, maybe it would be a good idea just to have a sort of a 2-minute summary of the 2 strands, right? So what we've heard this morning. So I can go, because I was behind the first, well, the 1st, the 3rd, and the 5th panel. I can maybe mention some of the themes discussed in this, and maybe Luke, because Luke was behind panels 2, 4, and 6. Maybe he can say at least some of the keywords, some of the things that were mentioned there. And I can start. So interestingly, and you know, sort of like intentionally, but like I don't think we intended it to go so well. But I think we really did have 2 strands, right? Panels 1, 3, and 5 were very much connected to each other, and those of you who participated in all 3 could have seen that. So we've heard many papers, 8 papers, and they all had to do with issues around environmentalism, various kinds of environments, sustainability. We heard keywords such as you know, global warming. So all like this very urgent, pressing issues, and very contemporary. And there were very interesting perspectives. And actually, we sort of managed to finish the 5th panel, but it kind of like spilled over. And towards the end of it, we were talking about nature and commodification of nature, but also about anthropomorphism and anthropomorphizing nature. And I read actually Luke saying that this is something that was discussed in maybe the last panel on the 2nd link as well. So maybe Luke, you can say maybe some of the keywords that were discussed there, and then we can, you know, like come back to all of these.
Okay, so I mean, I guess the other big sort of theme, so if one of the big things that's come out of this as kind of a major concern for students is the environment, in some sense that's interesting because it's probably a relatively new thing that visual culture studies deals with. The other sort of big theme is sort of something which cultural studies and visual culture has been dealing with for a long time. So it's probably our fault to an extent, which is kind of questions around identity. And we had a panel in the morning which was around genders and so I was looking at the title, bodies and genders. And the second panel was around culture and identity. But in a lot of ways, I mean, I guess what was very kind of clear that this was kind of dealt with very intersectionally by students, that it's very hard to actually pull those 2 kind of questions apart. And in the sort of the morning panel, we had a very interesting paper around Korean masculinity and K-pop and the ways that kind of global fandom of that is kind of changing kind of attitudes to masculinity in a much more diverse kind of a way. More generally, we had a very interesting paper. So I'm looking at my notes and getting confused what was in which panel. But we had Chloe, I think, in that panel, kind of presented some really interesting work, which was about the self and kind of her negotiation as an artist of kind of race and gender in Britain today, I think, really. Which I think kind of took on that question about how one empowers oneself. And I think one of the other sort of themes that I sort of spotted today in sort of students' research is that a lot of what students are doing. So I think when like 20 years ago, a lot of kind of stuff was quite academic in its nature, in that it wanted to understand things. But it's like Marx's kind of famous thing, the point's not to understand the world, but to change it. So a lot of the sort of the things that people have looked at have involved how you actually use research to go off and do something in the world. So Lorraine in the morning's got a very interesting project about children's book illustration, which again touched on those questions about anthropomorphism, but how are male and female characters represented in that? And she's kind of gone off and produced fact sheets and kind of intervened in the world. I'm getting very confused about the order of things. Alex kind of gave a very interesting promotion about Barbie dolls and how Barbie has sort of changed over the years, kind of changing ideas of gender that are involved in Barbie. And then sort of back to the sort of second panel, Molly gave a very interesting paper about the ways that animals were used in kids' things to kind of deal with quite complicated issues about identity in order to allow children to enter into those debates in a less threatening way than if it is with directly human characters. So if you like, you've got that distance that kind of the anthropomorphized character allows to be able to sort of play with some quite difficult social issues. And Petronella gave a very interesting paper about the ways that Western fashion design has appropriated images from Maasai culture. And she's, again, has a very, very interesting activist project where she's set up a website for Kenyan artists, so that in a sense, how can we create a space that isn't the space of these big fashion corporations, and kind of promote actual people from Kenya in making work. So the afternoon was the kind of the slightly kind of odd man out, in that it was about exhibition cultures, and again very kind of diverse sort of views on that. So we had Elisabetta, who gave us a powerful manifesto for the power of play and freedom over the commercial and kind of instrumentalized nature of the art world. We had a fascinating project from Isabel, who's kind of looking at how you can cross between animation and installation. And we also had a paper from Millie, who was looking at different ways that the museums stage history and create relationships between the history of the buildings that work is shown in and the objects on display. So I've possibly been much less efficient in drawing together and picking out things than Vlad was, and slightly over verbose, but hopefully that gives a picture for those that weren't there about some of the things that were being discussed over in our half of the room.
Okay, but then, like, since you mentioned all, like you said something about all the papers, maybe I should do the same for our strand. And I'm going to do this very quickly, and I'm going to start with the last one and proceed to the first one this morning. So Claudia, our very last presenter, talked about the relation between design and architecture and smell, with these very beautiful, mesmerizing pictures, if you ask me, of her own research. And her own research was about kind of like getting in contact with all these urban spaces in Slough and smelling them. Very beautiful and very interesting. And then Kate, those of us who were kind of joining us after 3:15, you probably heard us talking to Kay because it kind of like spilled over about this idea of anthropomorphization. But like Kay talked about Bambi, she's absolutely fascinated, and you can see this in her presentation, absolutely fascinated with Bambi. The 1942, is it 1942 animation?
Yeah.
But Bambi as a sort of very contemporary source for actually talking about these issues such as environmentalism. And then Magdalena with her very interesting history. I've never asked her if she's coming from around Regensburg or Passau. I know the area that she's talking about, but Passau, right? Yeah. I've been many times at that, like along that border with Austria. It's very interesting and very beautiful. But like, so she kind of framed the discussion about the relationship between human nature, between nature and culture, human cultures, urban cultures, and nature. So we turn to the parks, and again, very beautiful images of green spaces in London, right? And we had a very interesting point raised in that discussion, you know, whether we're actually kind of like maybe transforming nature into something that it is not. And maybe you can think about cities as more natural than nature, right? And that was, yeah, that was something that maybe we can continue during the open discussion. And then I'm going to go to the third panel on sustainability. Margareta, very interesting. She talked about her very concrete project where she had to create these very beautiful books that are trying to address biomimicry in graphic design work. And then Emily, who sadly had to go, I don't think she's with us now. She addressed the pandemic impact on active wear and whether there is something that big brands can learn from sustainable small businesses. And that was actually her argument. There is much to learn from the models of small businesses because they got it during the pandemic. They got it, right? And Nastya talked about hemp. With some very provocative claims, right? Maybe we can just like, you know, like instead of thinking about overconsumption, we could think about overproduction, but it should be overproduction of hemp. Like, let's make everything from hemp. That's very interesting because it's actually possible. You can make loads of things. We saw images of cars made out of hemp, right? So that was very interesting. And then to go to the first one, we started with Lucy, who talked about British gardens, and she looked a little bit at the history of British gardens, but then the discussion sort of like ended up looking at this sort of like activist take on gardening. So we saw this very beautiful and very interesting images of urban gardens, like sort of community gardens, and then again, very interesting discussion in the Q&A section that kind of continued from this idea of gardening and the British garden and what is fashionable in gardening and actually what sort of impact we have through our gardening. And then Harry talked about the Himalayas, right? And this sort of like show of strength, especially by loads of Westerners to go and climb on the Himalayas. And the tons of, you know, tens or probably hundreds of tons of rubbish that they leave behind. And he is asking, you know, like all these brands who are who are producing gear for those who do this sort of stuff. So like for mountaineers, is there something there that, you know, can say or address sustainability as a concept from like a, you know, is there a lesson to learn from there, right? So these were the papers in our strand. And I wanted to say something. So like, sorry, maybe I'm talking too much, but Luke's point is really interesting. So if 20 years ago, and I recognize myself in that. So 20 years ago, I was like 18, 19, first, second year in the faculty, in my studies, in my BA studies. And it was about that. It was about understanding. And I see the shift as well. I see loads of projects with our third year students, loads of projects that are trying to do things. It's about changing. It's about addressing change or finding solutions or identifying solutions to trigger a change. And I don't know if like all the others, so Anne, Emma, Lily, like if you have the same experience, but for me, it's really, really, really interesting that these themes, these major themes like sustainability on the one hand, but then also like identity, as they kind of come up again and again and again. And we are very contemporary with this, I have to say. Yeah, Anne, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, actually, I just wanted to pick up from what you were saying about that kind of 20-year shift, but because I'd been making some notes from the panel that I chaired about gender and bodies, but also thinking what I was taking away from the whole day was something to do with a kind of intergenerational conversation and really shifting meanings. So we're at really unpredictable times, obviously, but that there was a lot of kind of agility in what people were doing with things and what we maybe think we're doing in, you know, teaching people and asking people to talk about identities and so on. Things are coming out of that are really unpredictable intergenerationally, and I think that's really exciting. And I was maybe partly thinking, I know Alex is still here, and I really enjoyed his presentation about transgressive Barbie and how Barbie's meaning has changed. So, and I'd asked him a question about, well, why is it that Barbie's persisted so long? But partly what I was thinking was, well, why is it Barbie's persisted so long when she's been a kind of ironic and humorous figure for so long as well? And I think we got some answers, well, not answers, but suggestions about that as well. So I think the unpredictability, and I love Petronella's presentation as well, but all of them, but that unpredictability of, yeah, what we might think we know is just kind of shifting away from us in a really exciting way. So,
Thanks, Anne. Emma, Lily, Naomi, would you, or Rujana, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree, and I was going to pick up on the same thing. You know, as soon as Luke said that, I thought absolutely spot on. You know, I've been teaching for a very long time, you know, over 20 years, and it seems to me that it's almost as if, particularly in terms of kind of design subjects, I think it feels to me that for a long time design was almost looking for its kind of place in terms of contextualizing itself within discourse to give itself kind of validity, if you like. And it feels to me that we're no longer in that space, that our designers that we're working with, you guys that are here, have a sense of, I don't know, do have a sense of identity, and I have a kind of sense of their own narrative, and as a sense of their voice and the importance of their voice. So kind of this notion that you all have agency, I think, is really being kind of picked up upon, and that design can change things. I think there's a kind of real sense that design has the ability to change things, and it's very hopeful. I think it's been a very hopeful day, despite the fact that we've had kind of big conversations about, you know, living within a kind of climate crisis. It's actually been a really hopeful day.
Yeah.
I think I would add to that. You know, I think I agree, and I think it's really exciting. And I think anytime you're working with artists, makers, producers, you know, it's obviously incredibly important to kind of try and bridge that gap between the contextual, the theoretical, and the practical, and that's certainly something that I've concentrated on working on throughout the last, you know, number of years. But I also just want to say that I think it's not. I mean, let's definitely not leave understanding behind. I mean, obviously, understanding is imperative, and I think that's one thing that. You know, it's become extremely clear that there is such a you know, such a fracturing of knowledge and kind of a disruption of these unified monolithic theories or stories that we tell ourselves. But that doesn't mean that there aren't aspects of things that we really, you know, we want to continue to examine and research on a much broader scale. I mean, I'm in the sense that it doesn't want to become too subjective or about that shift, that it still needs to be rooted in some kind of extensive research that, you know, I mean, not that anybody was suggesting otherwise, but I just thought I would throw that out there.
Here, Lily. I think certainly from all the panels I witnessed, and certainly the panel I chaired as well, all these big themes are coming through with a wonderful sense of confidence, like you say, Naomi, about the identity of the designers and their ability and agency to actually change the world, but also a kind of acknowledgement of how complex these great world issues are. And certainly with Margarita and Nastya and Emily, they had each devised a different lens of looking at the world, or a toolkit, or a kind of method that can be given to designers to continue to work on these issues. So I think, you know, they're empowered, they're coming up with solutions, but they're continuing to hack away at these enormously complicated issues. And in the last panel that I sat in on, which was just wonderful, I think a key theme that kept coming through was this idea of disconnect, the disconnect between nature and culture, between industry and nature, etc. And I think today, in all the papers, we've seen massive potential for reconnection through discussion, through this forum, and through all the wonderful kind of ideas and solutions that all of the students have put forward in their work. And I remain massively impressed by everything I've learned today, because I've really learned a lot from you all, I would say. So thank you.
Great. Yeah, I cannot but echo all of that, but what I would like to, I suppose, add to this, and maybe this is just my particular educational background and disciplinary context, I don't know, but I really, kind of building on what Emma has just said in terms of confidence, I was really struck by how all of the research and all of the projects that we heard about today had this kind of strong sense of personal identity of the researcher, the creative, the artist, the designer behind it. And I think, you know, it's really amazing to see that students have the sort of confidence to take on deeply personal topics and to seek to investigate them and to contextualize them and to present them. Because I think, you know, again, from speaking from my own experience, I think that is also kind of a big change. I think there was maybe, I don't know, in the past, less of a sense of that was a legitimate way of approaching the world, I suppose, that you were trying to kind of be objective, whatever that kind of means, and kind of separating yourself from your work in a kind of way. So I am really struck by that, how our students really embrace their own kind of personal identities and narratives and stories, and do really explore them and put them in a wider context. And that for me is what kind of stood out. Again, what Lilly was saying, trying to still to root that in this wider kind of understanding and contextualization, and not just not that a personal, first person narrative is not obviously valid, but I think it's really important to recognize the way it's being placed in the wider framework.
Do we hear from some? Do any of the students want to say anything about their experiences, about what you took away from today, or?
Me.
Please feel free. I'm just taking over. Sorry, Vlad.
No. But I mean, this is not supposed to be a formal thing. So, you know, like, feel free to say things.
So can I talk?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Good. I just wanted to say thank you to everyone, because I think, so these are the things that I miss the most in the kind of contextualization of our society and the way it functions. I think I miss the café littéraires, but not in the posh sense and in the exclusive sense, but in the sense of the true conversations amongst people that share an interest for trying, for understanding and changing things. But it's, I don't know, I miss these conversations there, and it feels to me like the posh, the useful café littéraires that only the aristocrats could do, but in a kind of much more accessible way. So thank you for lifting my intellect and making me think a bit more.
Thank you.
I like that comment, lifting my intellect.
I agree. I feel like my intellect's been lifted. Yeah, I think it's good to have these conversations because it's quite rare to have these kinds of conversations. Like you said, Ellie. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's a good quote. I'm going to quote that.
Yeah, I also just wanted to say that like after just finishing on this like huge project, it's just so nice that we've now got like the opportunity to actually talk about it and present it. And I also really value the like talk up like afterwards, because you're in your bubble and you think and you work and you do, and obviously talk to tutors, and this year particularly was like only over Zoom. So yeah, but still, like, it's really good that we had the opportunity today to, yeah, basically present it and yeah, put it out there. Yeah.
Thank you. Is anyone else like, I sort of instituted myself as a chair of this discussion, but I that was not meant to be like, it's not like engraved, it's not written in stone that I'm chairing this. I mean, like I would have another observation, but like I don't know how much more do you want to stay, but like I have to say this. Another thing that really surprised me is the presence of practice. It was so impressive. Like all the projects that I've seen today, they have this sort of a practical. They have this sort of a tangibility. I mean, you can see them happening if they haven't happened yet. If they're just in the stage of a project, you can see them happening. You know, you can see them students, you know, like finishing their degrees, and then come September, you hear about something like for example, Margarita's website, biomimicry. But many other examples, and it's so interesting, and like, you know, all the papers like excellently supported by proper research, like proper academic research, but it's not just like library research. It's like they have this practical side, or this practical aspect, which like continues to impress me a lot. Then for me, this is like, it's really good. It's really good that it is like this. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you want to say something about this, but like, I just wanted to express this.
Well, no, I agree, Vlad. I think that's a real strength of what we do across the whole of art and design. And I think it's that sort of interrelationship between, you know, practice and research, actually. So that we, I think, probably, you know, all of the art and design programs in some way value research as driving practice, but vice versa, as practice as something that informs research. Now, there is lots of people have talked about the interrelationship between them in their own projects, how, you know, one thing informs the other.
I mean, if I can just give the example of my practice, because without doing this research, I wouldn't have created the work that I created. It heavily influenced everything, all the decisions I made. And it wasn't until I finished the dissertation that I felt a clear head with how what I wanted to do for my graduate film. So it was quite amazing how that, I mean, you think you know something, and then you do a good month and a half of intense research, and your ideas change so much, and you feel really humble. You feel humbled because your ideas, everything you thought you knew has just changed. And that helped me develop my work as a filmmaker and, yeah, a thinker. So it's great. It'd be great to do more dissertations. It's just so much hard work.
That's so sweet.
There's always an MA.
Contextual studies lecturers. Thank you, Kate.
Oh my God, an MA would be too intense. How many words is a dissertation at MA level? 10,000?
I mean, yeah, it's not too bad. You can do that.
I think it might be worthwhile, though, if you're an artist of any sort with a practice. I think it begs the question: and I think put it out to the students, is that actually should not research be practice, not have a dividing line between research and practice, because the two are partners. It's just that we you know, as an institution, we happen to break them down to units, but actually it's totally and utterly artificial. So it's worth bearing in mind that theory, practice, making and research are actually all climbers on the same rope, to quote.
Luke had a question.
Yeah, well, it's kind of a comment about that, really, because I think it is something that's very, very noticeable. But kind of like having kind of started with the like, how were things 20 years ago? I'm sort of thinking in the historical vein, and I'm thinking back to the history of Middlesex University, where that kind of question of the relationship between theory and practice, when there were the big sit-ins in Hornsey College of Art like 50 years ago, that was one of the big questions, is how do theory and practice start to come together, and for theory to be taught in a way which is meaningful and useful to practice, or history being taught in that sort of way. And hey, it's only taken us 50 years to get that done, you know. But sort of finally, it sort of seems like we're getting somewhere with that, if that's what we've got with this conference. But in a sense, I think that is sort of something really, really interesting that's kind of only just been happening in the last few years, really, at Middlesex, and probably throughout kind of the sector. And I just kind of also wanted to sort of pick up, because we're talking about, because I think there's something related, which is like how students go about research. Because again, like when I was at university, or when I first started teaching, you know, essays, to write an essay, you read loads of books. It was book learning, if you like. That was your research method. You read some books about semiotics and you applied semiotic theory to something. I guess like what was really kind of striking were how varied the ways that students went about doing research is, from interviewing people, from like Alex's kind of collection of stuff is kind of part of his kind of research method, and to kind of the making of art being part of it. So there are all these kind of very kind of more sort of interesting expanded ways that students seem to be doing research at the moment, which again is very sort of interesting and humbling to me as a, you know, sort of someone quite sort of wedded to the old ways, I think.
May I just add walks? I've seen many kinds of walks today in the papers. Like I've seen walks in the cities, I've seen walks at the recycling center, I've seen walks in parks, I've seen like so many kinds of walks, just like walking and observing and kind of like getting empirical data, you know? It's still subjective, but kind of taking the distance to reflect on it. It's really, really interesting and also uplifting, I have to say.
And I'm just going to follow up saying that's not what I meant by agility, really, like, but actually that word keeps coming back to me, but that being agile with ideas, you know, doing really, you know, committed and focused research, but then be kind of playing with it, I guess. Yeah, playing with it and going somewhere else. Yeah, agile.
Sorry, I'm mute. Okay, would anyone want to add something or anything to this discussion?
Thank you, Vlad.
No, thank you all.
Yeah, thank you,
It was really nice
Vlad.
getting to tell our opinions
Right.
and to talk about the subjects we chose.
Thank you
Thanks,
to all
Alex.
the students who put so much work into, well, first of all, researching their topics and then presenting them today. Thank you very, very much. It was great.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe we just give each other a round of applause.
Yeah. Well done, everyone.
Well done. Thank you.
It was really, really a
Thank
great
you.
day. And yeah, thank you all for being here today and sharing your research and being part of the discussions was really, really amazing.